You're listening to the Full Court Press with your host, Drew Duncan. Don't you dare touch that dial. Gathered here today, dearly beloved, for a requiem of the Big 12. Once a powerhouse conference, formerly known as the Big 8, with many national champions, i.e. Oklahoma and Nebraska, dominating in their respective decades of power, to the extension of what became known as the Big 12, adding those teams from Texas, to the loss of several teams going to the SEC and Pac-12 for not being able to or wanting to add new teams to their conference. Brothers and sisters, with the fall of OU on Saturday, we can rest assured that the Big 12 will not survive. Please, a moment of silence. Man, I've been saying this for a long time. I've been saying this for a long time. People have been talking about the Big 12 dissolving for years. And I think with OU losing to Iowa State, it probably just happened. You beat Ohio State very convincingly in their backyard, and you lose to Iowa State. And by the way, you blow a big lead that you had on them too. You're done. TCU's the lone undefeated team in the conference right now. And they're not that good. Had a hard time putting away West Virginia. How good is Texas? How good is Kansas State? Yeah, that was a fun game to watch. Double overtime. But how good are both of those teams, though? That's what I'm getting at. Look, I want you to all understand something. That since 1999, and we're going to start with OU since they're the ones that suffered the big upset to Iowa State this past Saturday, that since 1999, the Oklahoma Sooners alone are 21-22 in out-of-conference top 25/bowl games. Did you know that Bob Stoops only had a 9-9 bowl record? Did you know that he was horrendous in BCS games? Did you know that against the top 25 out-of-conference, since 1999, OU has a 12-13 record? That's including bowl games. Since 1999, they're 12-13. And no team in the Big 12 has actually fared any better than that. Everybody goes, well, big game Bob, he's so good, and, he's got this great record against top 25 opponents. You're right. He is 60-30 against top 25 opponents. However, in a plethora of those games, very unsuccessful outside of the Big 12. You can rate Kansas State all you want to, but we saw what happened with that. That's, again, why I don't do preseason polls. We saw what happened with Kansas and Vanderbilt. We saw what happened with Texas and Maryland. West Virginia is going to be right back out of the top 25. They were in there to start the year, game against Virginia Tech. Now they've lost again to TCU. Nobody in the Big 12 has played anybody relevant this year except for Oklahoma, and they found a way to blow it. I said that unless you're Oklahoma, you're probably going to have to go undefeated in order to make it through the Big 12. Oklahoma still has a chance at one loss, but I think that this only proves to me that the Big 12 has long since been dead. They cannot keep anybody that will maintain a season where they don't lose to somebody that they shouldn't lose to. They beat Auburn in the Sugar Bowl last year. Auburn was an 8-4 football team. You see, that's another thing. Because you're in the top 25, that doesn't necessarily mean that you deserve to be there. And OU gets special privilege. Everybody talked about during the BCS era, the SEC getting all this special privilege. How about Oklahoma going down, what was it, 35-7 to Kansas State in the Big 12 championship game and still ended up playing for a title? Come on. The Big 12. How about in 2013, Kansas State was 12-0, played a 5-7 Baylor team. They got manhandled in that game. Then they turn around and lose to Oregon. What was it, the Fiesta Bowl that season? How about the first ever college football playoff year? TCU loses a big lead to Baylor. But Baylor turns around the next week and loses to West Virginia. TCU and Baylor would end up splitting a Big 12 title. Baylor loses to Central Florida. TCU beats Ole Miss, but without their best player in Treadwell, the wide receiver. And by the way, at that point, Ole Miss had lost 3 out of their last 4. Think about all the national titles that have happened since 1999. You know, the ACC has 5 national champions. The SEC has 9 national champions. The Big 12 has 2. The only conference worse than that is another conference I don't believe in, and that's the Pac-12. Even the Big 10 has 2 national champions. When was the last time the Big 12 played for a national title? Go ahead, I'll wait. You could argue that the year Oklahoma State played Stanford in, what was it, the Orange Bowl, if I remember correctly, that either one of those teams could have played for a national title that year. You could have very well argued it. But there again is the lack of favor that the Big 12 receives. I don't think that voters really respect the Big 12. If they did, TCU and or Baylor would have been in the college football playoff. They wouldn't have jumped Ohio State from number 6 to number 3 and gave them TCU's spot. It wouldn't have happened. Voters respect OU, but that's because they're OU. But even in Oklahoma hasn't really been relevant. And in the last 7 years, probably their biggest win was against Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. I mean, that's really about it. Do you know that at one point, Oklahoma had lost 4 games in a row to ranked opponents? Clemson again in the college football playoff. And then the next year, they peeled off 2 more losses to Houston and Ohio State in a row. Houston's not even in a, quote, Power 5 team. They could have had a chance to get Houston, by the way, according to a lot of reports, BYU and some other football teams. No. We're too good for those guys. Maybe they're justified. BYU's not doing that well. But Memphis has been coming along strong. Memphis has now beat a ranked opponent in their backyard 3 years in a row. 2 of them have been out-of-conference opponents, and one of them was Auburn. By the way, finished that season 8-4, remember? So maybe they looked at that and went, well, they're not really that good. Well, if they're not really that good, then we're not going to worry about OU and their win over Auburn. They can't get it together. There's no consistency in the Big 12. If they beat a team that looks like they're really good, they'll turn around the next week and lose to a team that's extremely bad. The Oklahoma State Cowboys ran through what looked to be a really good TCU football team a couple of years ago. What happened? They turn around the next week and they get thrashed by a Baylor football team who was using a wide receiver as their quarterback because there were so many injuries to that team. Do you think that looked good for the Big 12? There's no defense in the Big 12. Everybody hangs 30 on everybody. KU gets 30 points. Baylor gets 40 points. Baylor can't beat Liberty. And yet Baylor hangs in there with Oklahoma, Kansas State. Come on. That's the issue with the Big 12. There's no premier team. And see, when Colorado, Nebraska, Missouri, and Texas A&M left, it should have been obvious that OU and Texas were the premier teams, and they should have far and away been dominant over that conference. But they weren't. Instead, teams like Baylor started to come up. Now, look, I understand that when TCU got there, there was a lot of high expectations, big hopes for that football team and everything that they're able to accomplish. And the year before it looked really good because they were undefeated. But if anybody may remember, they were undefeated but got knocked around in a bowl game. That was the knock. They were in the same conference with Boise State. And outside of those two teams, who was really over there playing? TCU's undefeated. Let it go. No. Does anybody really think that TCU is going to run the gauntlet with Kenny Hill? They've got a solid defense. I've pointed that out. Their defense really isn't that bad. Oklahoma State had played nobody. Baylor didn't play anybody. West Virginia, you can give them Virginia Tech. OU, obviously, you can give them Ohio State. TCU, you can give them Arkansas. Who'd KU play? Kansas State's toughest game was against Vanderbilt, and they couldn't get it done. You look at the majority of the teams in that conference, they're not doing anything outside of the conference. Oklahoma State's biggest game out of conference was probably Tulsa. Well, who knew that Pitt was going to be bad? I think a lot of people knew Pitt was going to be bad. Look, the bottom line is the Big 12 is probably going to dissolve if they don't add some teams, which will add to recruiting. A BYU, a Houston, a Memphis, right now, those three teams have enough clout to help the recruiting for other teams and themselves. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's how this works. And the fact that a name like OU is there, a name that like Texas is there. Well, I didn't get recruited by Texas, but I did get recruited by Houston, who I know is going to play Texas, and I could probably get some damn good TV time out of that. I can say I walked in to their stadium and let them have it. I get to play Texas 4 years in a row. 2 at my place, 2 at their place. It helps recruiting for everybody. Hey, you're from Texas, kid? You know, Houston beat us last year. I heard you're a Longhorn guy. You know, we're the premier team in the state. We're going to be playing Texas Tech. We're going to be playing Texas. You're going to be playing against some of your buddies. You're going to be playing against some of your rivals. It's a chance to stick it to them. Oh, yeah, okay. That's how this works. Why the Big 12 still thinks that they're so good that they don't have to do anything about this is beyond me. Because the more you place this on OU's back, the more you figure out 2 things. Number one, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. To say 1 or 2 teams should be able to carry us, and then we'll figure everything else out from there is not fair to 2 programs. The other thing is you're not above having a decent title game. The Big 12 championship was a disaster for a number of years. It really was. It was generally a blowout. You had that controversial Texas-Nebraska game. The conspiracy theorists will tell you that people didn't want Nebraska to leave with a Big 12 title. Same thing with the OU game, right? OU and Nebraska. People will say that they didn't want Nebraska to walk out of there with a Big 12 title. There were some questionable calls. A lot of bad games, some blowouts. It's not just on one football team. I used OU as a Kickstarter and as a glamour point just to give you an idea of what one team has really done over the years. When you think about their out-of-conference overall record of 21-22, when you think about being 9-9 in bowl games, when you think about being 12-13 against top 25 out-of-conference opponents, it's really not that spectacular of a resume. Well, they were there. So what? Everybody said that about Ohio State. Does being there matter if you get manhandled? Iowa State, I'm telling you, Baker Mayfield, man, he started something because Iowa State went for the gusto. They understood what they accomplished. It was a backup quarterback, guys. That's why their flag went in the middle of the field. A backup quarterback. We just beat OU in OU. Who's, by the way, their home record has been horrendous over the last couple of years. I think it was 2014 season, right? When OU lost, 3 games in their backyard in 1 year? You let Ohio State manhandle you in your backyard? Now you let Iowa State do it to you. What was it, 21 unanswered points by Iowa State? And you've got to give those kids credit. They showed great resiliency. But I think it just speaks to the lack of true competition in the Big 12. This is the Full Court Press. I am your host, Drew Duncan. You guys are checking me out live from the K-Sun Studios in Wichita, Kansas. I am on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all at DrewDuncan83. We're going to take a quick sponsor break. When we come back on the flip side, Michigan versus Michigan State, as told by Forrest Gump. We'll be back right after this. Don't you dare touch that dial.